And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Welcome to the California Board of Equalization Board meeting. This time all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later we will have a question and answer session, and instructions will be provided at that time. If you dialed in on the host phone number as one of the panelists, your line will be live throughout the conference. Please exercise good mute protocols on your side to keep the sound quality at the optimum level. And for everyone else, if you should require operator assistance during the call, press star then 0 on your phone's keypad. And as a reminder, this conference is being recorded. At this time, I'd now like to turn the conference over to our host, Chairman Vasquez. Please go ahead.
Good morning. We're ready to call this special meeting of the Board of Equalization to order. Ms. Davis, if you please call the roll.
Chairman Vasquez.
Present.
Member Dschafer.
Present.
Member Gaines. Member Gaines. Member Cohen.
Present.
Present.
Ms. Stowers.
Present.
A quorum is present and the board meeting is called to order. If I can get you all to please stand and we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, for which it stands, one nation, under God,
Indivisible.
Before we get started, I want to remind the board members that all members are invited to and speakers are all simultaneously on a shared open teleconference call line, and that patience is needed to keep the audio clean and clear. I ask each member to ask for their turn to speak after each presentation has concluded so that the transcriptionist can clearly hear and properly record this meeting. Ms. Davis, please announce our first order of business.
Chairman Vasquez, our first order of business is an announcement from Acting Chief of Board Proceedings, Henry Nanjo.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Thank you, Chairman Vasquez. Good morning to the individuals who have joined the Board of Equalization for today's meeting and teleconference. Throughout the duration of today's meeting, you will be participating in a listen-only mode. As you may know from our public agenda notice and our website, we have requested individuals who wish to make a public comment to email our board proceedings staff email, Ms. Indu Bala Vinson at BOE.ca.gov. Her email address is on the website. Note, for the sole purpose of identifying your telephone line so that you may be unmuted at the appropriate time for public comment, we need you to provide your name and phone number so the operator can identify which line to unmute. If a public comment request has been received by our board proceeding staff on a specific item after the presentation of the item has concluded, your name will be called and the operator will provide direction for you to identify yourself. The operator will identify your line and unmute you so you may make your public comment. We ask that the person whose name is called give their public comment at that time and limit their comment to 3 minutes. We ask that everyone who is not interested or not intending to make a public comment, please mute their line if possible, and if not, to minimize background noise. If there are technical difficulties when we are in the public comment portion of the meeting, we will do our best to read any submitted comments into the record at the appropriate time. Thank you for your patience and understanding.
Thank you. Before we begin, I want to remind the members that they should direct the ED but not staff on any matters. The ED may ask them to provide information. With that, let me ask Ms. Davis to please call our first item. Is Ms. Davis there?
Pardon me. The first item is item N, public comments on matters not on the agenda. There were none received at this time. So the next item is item M, public policy hearing. Chairman Vasquez will lead a discussion on the impact of COVID-19 on the Property Tax Administration Working Group Report. Chair Vasquez.
Thank you. Good morning, members. I want to thank the members of the public who have joined us today and are waiting on the line to participate in this public policy hearing. I also want to thank our Executive Director, Brenda Fleming, and the BOE staff for the extra effort involved in making this additional May meeting happen. Today is the first opportunity of the board members to review the findings and engage with the COVID-19 Property Tax Relief Task Force and Working Group participants on the short-term needs of assessors, the AAB officials, taxpayer representatives, and taxpayers. Members, our meeting today is scheduled to go until 4 p.m., which gives us about 6 hours for our discussion. Please note that we also have a 2-day board meeting at the end of May that includes at least one full day slotted for COVID-19 public policy discussion. First, members, I want to thank you for your great patience during these last 3 weeks, because Bagley King advice you had to wait silently while the Vice Chair and I convened the task force, gathered input from all the parties, and finally produced a written report that you received on May 8th. The purpose of this meeting is for you, the members, to fully engage. I apologize for any misunderstandings, and I ask you to decide at this meeting if you want all future discussions to happen in full publicly noticed meetings or continue with the task force. Second, regarding the report, I want to assure you that we did not take a position or make a recommendation on anything. Our objective was to receive and transmit to you as much stakeholder input as possible so that you would have a neutral report in order to develop solutions you think are best for all taxpayers, assessors, and the AABs. The positions and recommendations you see in each working group report on each of the 5 issues are those of the participants only, not of the board. Third, regarding stakeholders and issues, we started out with about 50 people, but as the meetings progressed, additional individuals contacted us and no doubt contacted you, asking to participate, and they were allowed to do so. Regarding issues, the 5 topics were selected based on the board's determination of the most pressing short-term needs. Short terms was defined as 90 days at the April 21st meeting. If you find issues that need further than that, we should move those into what we call the midterm category. We can bring them back again at the May 28th meeting, which is already set aside to address midterm and long-term needs. The options listed at the end of each work group report are merely a few possible actions the board could take, but are not complete and not a complete list, and are not intended to limit your choices. Finally, regarding today's meeting, members, please take full opportunity to engage on every issue and sub-issue with the Vice Chair and I and any of the stakeholders on the call. In terms of the order of members, I defer to you on this order. Even though the topics were numbered 1 through 5, you can take them out of order and decide on a different order if you wish. In terms of our motions, to ensure all motions are clear, we will follow a 3-step process. Step 1, since discussion on the item should be complete before a motion is made, I'll ask at some point, members, are we finished with the discussion on this issue and ready for a motion? Step 2, if the answer is yes, I'll ask to please move an action you think the board should take. If there's a second, I will ask for the discussion on the motion. Third, once the discussion on the motion is complete, I'll ask the clerk to read it back to us, and I'll ask the Chief Counsel, do you have any procedural concerns? So hopefully moving forward, people will understand at the end of this discussion which ones are actually action items and not just items or suggestions or comments that people made. final points to address. We received 1 or 2 written responses to the report pointing out errors in the task force report. We apologize for any inaccuracies. I can assure you that they were not intentional. Our staffs worked long, hard hours, and I wanted to thank both my staff, starting with Kari, Sue, Juan, Chris, Jean, Jamil, and then, of course, my vice chair and his staff, Gary, Sue, Cody. You all really went above and beyond the call of duty, and I know it took a lot of long hours and rewrites to put this all together, and I really appreciate it. If any participants' questions on the board's authority on an issue, we, the board, will address in the public or in our resources based on our understanding of our constitutional and statutory authority and our governance, and will issue a decision. And then the third one I want to just put out is to the participants in the telemeeting. It's important for each participant to be respectful of the time in order to give everyone an opportunity to speak. Since this is a board meeting, board members will have priority and can address their comments and questions to any or all participants. But please do not dominate the discussion in your response. I ask that each participant, other than the board members, observe this protocol so that I don't have to ask you to temporarily stand down. Thank you. Let me ask now my vice chair if he would like to share his comments regarding the work of the task force and the report.
Thank you, Chair Vasquez. I'd be happy to share with you comments. Our state is facing a public health and economic crisis of unprecedented proportion. Thanks to the timely and informed response of our state and local governments, we appear to have successfully flattened the curve. As our healthcare providers grapple with the health consequences of the pandemic, our workers and our businesses confront the crushing economic consequences. San Diego County is currently grappling with 25% unemployment. Many people are fearful and desperate and do not know how they will feed their children in the coming months. The chair and I and all of our board members recognize the necessity of doing everything within our power to alleviate the burden of this crisis on our families. For that reason, we convened the task force to work with stakeholders to maximize the public benefit of this institution. I want to thank everyone who participated in the task force and its working groups. Many have spent hours in discussion and debate, freely given of their decades of concrete experience in the tax and assessment field. I want to thank my staff, including Gary Gardner, my chief deputy, Sue Blake, my tax attorney, Cody Pedersen, my assistant to the member, and Michelle Harrison of the Sacramento office, who's head of my constituent relations, as well as the outstanding staff of Chair Vasquez's office, led by Kari Hammond, for stepping up to the challenge on such short notice. I particularly want to thank Governor Newsom for listening to our request to address the business property tax statement deadline of May 7th. We are extremely grateful for his intervention by issuing an executive order to extend the deadline to May 31st. This is a huge relief for struggling businesses. This intimate, frank, transparent deliberation and cooperation between governors and the governed represents some of the best in our Republican form of government. Please accept my thanks and my hope that we will continue to build on this spirit of cooperation. This is Vice Chair Dschafer.
Thank you. Let me go back to the members now. Earlier I mentioned if people had a preference, if the members had a preference, whether we just want to go through each working group, 1 through 5, or if there's any other specific order or rearrangement of the order that any of the members have a preference for.
Chair Vasquez, this is Member Gaines.
Yes, Mr. Gaines, go ahead.
Could I make an opening statement also?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. So I just wanted to start off with wishing everybody a good morning and thanking you, Chair Vasquez, along with Vice Chair Dschafer, for all of the hard work that you put in, many, many hours, assimilating all this information to the benefit of the public and to us as a board. So thank you very much for these efforts, and I look forward to the discussions that we have. But I wanted to get back to the big issue, and that has to do with this being the first day of a cautionary reopening of California, and I'm very excited about that. Now is the time to shift our focus to going back to work, to opening doors of small businesses that have been shut for 2 months. It's a new day, and we call upon the creativity, the ingenuity of Californians. We have overcome many obstacles as a state, as a nation, and we must rely on our business community, the lifeblood of our economy, to rise up and lift us out of the grips of this pandemic. Of course, this must be done with the right precautions. Our seniors and those most at risk must be protected. But we must not live in fear. We must press through this and return to some sort of normal fashion where we can greet our neighbors and our friends, gather, assemble together, and break bread, and spend our money in our local stores. Churches and houses of worship must be open for prayer, but that must be done in a responsible way. We will be mindful of our schools that serve our communities and make sure they remain strong and can educate our children in the fall. I firmly believe that if we open our doors, get out in the fresh air, and exercise, and consume the fruits and vegetables and meat harvested in this great state, we can and we will come together once again and lift California's economy back to its well-known vitality. We must send a clear message to the government that it can't tax us out of a recession. It is our duty as leaders of this great state of California to protect our small businesses and serve the people that have been stuck at home for these last few months. I'm proud to be a Californian because we have a history of strength, vitality, and a strong community. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. With that, members, if I'm hearing no other comments or suggestions on the order, I will just start with the work group number 1.
Excuse me, this is
Member Cohen, yes.
Good morning, yes.
Morning.
So, good morning. I, too, would like to give some opening remarks.
Sure.
Good morning, everyone on the call, to the staff and to the taxpayers tuning in, stakeholders. I'd like to also join my colleagues in really acknowledging once again the extraordinary and innovative leadership that's been provided by Governor Newsom, by his administration, the legislature, and all of the local government leaders, many of whom might even be on this call. I'm thinking about the assessors specifically during this pandemic. I also just want to take a moment to publicly thank our first responders, healthcare professionals, and the service men and women, and during this commitment, thank them for their commitment during this time. And last but not least, I want to acknowledge every Californian that's been sheltering in place following the orders, and just want to remember that we are stronger together and that we will recover from this pandemic. And Mr. Chair, if I'm understanding the flow of the public policy hearing today, you're getting ready to call item 1, specifically the impact of COVID-19 on property tax administration, the work group report. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. I had a few remarks specific to that portion of our agenda. Just want to recognize that on March 27th, as the reality of COVID-19 crisis was becoming increasingly apparent, I sent a letter to the chair of the board requesting that we schedule an emergency meeting of the State Board of Equalization, and this was under the provisions of Government Code Section 11125.5, which is the disruption of public facilities. Really, to begin to provide the board an opportunity to discuss and potentially take action on the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the governor's stay-at-home executive order N33-20 on a statewide property tax administration. And for the record, I'd like to highlight that in my letter, I requested that we use all the tools at our disposal, including open public meetings, to fulfill our constitutional responsibility, to vet problems, and most importantly, to find solutions to ensure uniform statewide guidance for assessors and for property taxpayers, as well as to seriously explore how relief can be provided to those individuals and small businesses who've been most deeply impacted by the coronavirus pandemic, all while addressing the impacts of potential reduction in property tax revenues. And in my letter, I outlined 6 issues affecting property tax administration, which I believe merited public review and discussion from our county assessors, from the taxpayers, from our stakeholders, from practitioners, from everyone. And briefly, let me highlight what those 6 issues were. First was simple: meeting deadlines for assessors, offices, or assessment appeals boards, which has now been referenced in LTA number 218/006. Second, I requested that we examine what additional authority could be needed through an executive action of the governor, the status of his response to the boards, and the status of the response of our request. Third, I asked that there was some kind of ensuring that uniform guidance is provided to homeowners and small business property taxpayers regarding the county tax collector's authority over payment deadlines, the option of waiver of penalties, fees, interest, quite honestly, to clear up the confusion regarding the boards and the assessor's role in the property tax assessment administration. Fourth point in the letter discussed the assessors and the clerks of the appeal boards, the possible postponement of deadlines, which also included in the emergency regulations under the board's current authority pursuant to the Revenue Tax Code, Section 155, and exploring board support for legislative remedies to address challenges to uniform property tax administration that has resulted from the pandemic. And finally, the 6th point that I highlighted in the letter was a request to possibly receiving a report from, and of course, discussing with the executive director and the deputy director of property tax their plans and recommendations to address property tax administration in the face of the pandemic, and vetting the options that best practices for vetting options and best practices for ensuring that the system is uniform and fair. The chair replied to my request for an emergency board meeting on March 30th. The chair rejected the request for an emergency board meeting, citing the lack of legal authority and concern for the costs and additional burden on BOE staff, which is fine, okay. The chair decided to move up the scheduled April 28th board meeting to April 21st to provide a forum for the examination of COVID-19 related issues, which I certainly applaud and encouraged and was supportive of. The chair asked that I narrow my 6 issues to very specific questions that the board and the assessors have sufficient authority, data, and information to discuss and resolve. Fortunately, during the April 21st board meeting, there was a very robust discussion, very thoughtful discussion on the issues that I raised, including public comment from assessors. We heard from administrators of the Assessment Appeal Board. We heard from tax practitioners as well as BOE executive staff. And as a result of the discussion, the board considered and voted to authorize the creation of a board member work group comprised of the chair and the vice chair to further review and then also to drill down on the issues raised at the April 21st board meeting. I supported and continue to support the formation of the work group. I also, in that meeting, requested that the board member work group be publicly noticed. I was especially concerned that the larger taxpayer community would not have an opportunity to participate. And my request concerning the motion to establish a work group was made at minute 47 and 36 seconds, if you'd like to go back and review the record. But during the second half of the April 21st board meeting, the chair responded to my request by stating, well noted. And honestly speaking, I'm disappointed that these meetings were not held publicly. They were not noticed. And from what I understand, they haven't been noticed for two reasons. First, that there was not a broad and all-inclusive notice to taxpayers so that they could participate in the meeting. And the second point that disappointed me was that 3 board members and their staff couldn't participate in the work group because the notice requirements in the Bagley-Keene Open to Act meeting, quite frankly, just weren't followed. So at this time, I'm not looking to take away from the work, the hard work and the diligence that the chair and the vice chair and their staff have done. I believe that we owe a primary duty to all Californians when we're discussing ways to respond to the pandemic and to, most importantly, ensure that all policy discussions be conducted in an open and transparent manner. So I was grateful to hear the chair acknowledge this. I hope that we'll be able to correct this and move forward as we continue to have meetings from now until the end of the year. This means that publicly noticed meetings under the letter and the spirit of Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act must always be executed. If there was any recognition that California was operating under an emergency condition, a meeting could have been called as an emergency meeting within the time frame that the work group actually conducted their meeting. And if there was not a recognition of the emergency, the work group still could have conducted a publicly noticed meeting during the week of May 4th. In any event, we are here where we are today, and now we're going to begin to proceed to review the reports of the work group. Unfortunately, without the benefit of having heard the presentations from the participants and the stakeholders, but we also don't know if others wish to participate, but were prevented from doing so because they didn't know or didn't have access to the work group discussions. So thank you for allowing me a few minutes. I wanted to get these comments noted for the record, and at this time, I'm happy to proceed. Thank you.
Chairman Vasquez?
I'm sorry. Yes, Ms. Stowers, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I too like to make a couple of brief comments.
Sure.
First of all, thank you. I'm looking forward to this public discussion on talking about property tax assessment issues. I would like to thank Chair Vasquez and Chair Dschafer for accepting the role of co-chairing the BOE COVID-19 task force. When I voted for the establishment of the task force, it was under the understanding that all task force meetings would be open to the public, properly noticed, and legal analysis would be provided for the various issues. I specifically asked if the task force would analyze the opposing positions from the tax representatives and the assessors and their tax counsel on whether RTC Section 170 required physical damage to property in order to have relief. In addition to not having this legal analysis, the report that we received late Friday evening did not include a fiscal analysis or any implementation considerations for the proposals. Because of the lack of a public meeting, legal analysis, fiscal analysis, and implementation considerations, I find it very challenging to take action on most of the issues outlined in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just go, as we begin to the work groups, beginning with number 1, just for the record, actually, I think it should reflect that Ms. Cohen's comments that were made after the motion was made. So that's why I just said well noted. But obviously we couldn't incorporate those if we were going to do a task force. Just for the people in the audience, when you set up a task force, it's a working group. And because of Bagley-Keene, which I think is a little bit more restrictive than the Brown Act that many of us are familiar with, you can't obviously have more than 2 members participating. So technically, while it was as open as possible, you couldn't have more than 2 of us participating without calling an emergency in a special meeting. And I don't think a task force that we set up rose to the occasion of having an emergency or a special meeting. But those are just my thoughts. Anyway, moving forward, I think there's so much that needs to be done, and I think there was a lot of good input from a lot of the stakeholders, and I know many of them are on the line today, and I hope the members, especially those that weren't able to participate in the task force meetings, should feel free to ask any one of those stakeholders that are on the line any questions or clarifications they may need. And as you could see, especially as we look at some of these items that we listed as short-term, after we discussed many of them, I think several of them need to probably get bumped into the mid-range and long-term goals. But that will be decided by the board at some point today, hopefully. Let me start with the first working group, and that was, and it's actually one of the quickest ones, because if you look at it, the issue was, should the May 7th filing deadline for the 571S be extended due to COVID-19 impacts? Of course, you know, May 7th is come and gone, and this was the quickest because two of the options that were available to us have already been done. You know, the governor stepped up and actually put out an executive order that extended the May 7th filing deadline to the end of the month, May 31st, which technically was June 1st because the 31st happens to land on a Sunday. And then the second is there is an LTA now, 2020-024, that's coming out, that's out as well, based on the governor's time extension. I'm very grateful for that. However, we have one unresolved issue that I will bring back at the next meeting on May 28th for the board to decide. As we learned about the problems and the need for quick solutions from many of the stakeholders in this crisis, we understand that there are other deadlines this board may need to extend. The statute that grants us authority for time extensions is Section 155. I want us as the board to address our authority under this statute. The Vice Chair and I looked into this in some detail, and we strongly believe the board has broad statutory authority under Section 155, and I will submit an issue paper for your consideration at the May 28th meeting. The only thing I ask is our legal counsel, Henry, if you wish to submit an opinion, please send it to the Vice Chair and I before the deadline so that we can incorporate it and attach it to our issue paper for the board's consideration on May 28th.
Will do. Chairman Vasquez, if I can ask, when do you need that legal opinion by?
Well, I'd like to give these folks an opportunity to at least a week's notice before the 28th meeting, if possible.
Okay, we can do that. We will get you something, you and the Vice Chair, something along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, do you have any questions?
Chairman Vasquez?
Yes, Ms. Dowers.
So, is my understanding correct that
I can barely hear you, Ms. Dowers.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me try. Is this better?
A little better.
Okay. Is my understanding correct that the legal opinion that the Chief Counsel has agreed to provide will be made public to everyone? There will not be any attorney-client privilege?
Let me ask Henry. I think it's my understanding it goes to the members, but let me double check.
It's your call, Chairman Vasquez, as you requested it, whether you would like it to be a public opinion or a opinion just to the board members or any smaller group. So I'll go by your direction, or if you want to think about it, let me know. I will act accordingly.
Ms. Dowers, does that answer your question?
No.
May I jump in? This is
sure.
From what I understand, I think to answer Ms. Dowers' question, it is within the purview of the board. And I would like to suggest that just board members receive the opinion to review, to digest, and then we can consider making it public
Yes, I was going to recommend that we just keep it confidential and then let the board in the May 28th, if they choose to put it out to the public, we can.
That's reasonable. That the Chief Counsel will provide the opinion, and it will be provided to all of the members prior to the board meeting. And then after our review, we would have the option if we would like to make it public.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
you, members.
Yes, Mr. Gaines, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to get back to work issue number 1. And again, thank you for all the work on that, and especially your communication as chair with the governor's office and the extension that the governor granted. We've got to remember that we've got a lot of small businesses out there that are hurting and struggling. And so while this is just a small piece of a very big puzzle in terms of trying to provide relief, we very much appreciate that. And also the extension of property taxes for individuals in their homes. The governor granted that for up to 12 months without penalty. And so that, again, is another opportunity to help our citizens that are struggling here in this very tough pandemic. So just wanted to make those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, unless I hear any other comments, we'll go ahead and move on to the work group number 2, which is relief from assessment, appeals deadlines. Members, would you like to is there any members that would like to take a lead in starting the discussion on this issue?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, this is Malia. I'd like to comment on the first item.
Going back to number 1?
Going back to number 1, I just wanted to first find out if there's any persons on the call who'd like to comment on item 1, maybe express their views for the record. Also, regarding the policy outlines in this item, I'd like to hear the opinion or the advice of the executive director. I'd like to hear possibly from the chief counsel, deputy director of our property tax division, or any other BOE subject matter expert that's appropriate.
Sure.
Before we move on, so I'd like to open that up to.
Sure. Let me start with Brenda Fleming.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just doing a volume check first to see if you can hear me okay.
Yes.
I appreciate this opportunity to join in the conversation. I've got both on this call with us Chief Counsel Henry Nanjo and Deputy Director Dave Young. And so I really am going to give them a full opportunity to weigh in, specifically Mr. Young, who really has the depths of our property tax expertise as the deputy. But I think in general what we're looking for is the opportunity for us to protect our tax systems that we use as a system to ensure that local governments are funded, et cetera, and to make sure that we're doing so within the realms of our constitutional duties and responsibilities. We are absolutely sensitive, if you can hear me okay, we're absolutely sensitive to the impact that COVID-19 is having on our taxpayers and just everyone, not just throughout the state, but throughout our nation and throughout the world. What we do want to do, however, is make sure that the property tax system that's in place and established in order to help fund a number of the local government services, we want to make sure that we do to the best of our ability to we're able to protect that, again, while doing so within our constitutional duties. So what we're looking for today is the opportunity for the board members to have this discussion so we can get a greater sense of, both sides of the discussion, from external stakeholders, public, certainly the taxpayers, county assessors, and all of the interested parties, so then we can make the best determination as to what solution, where we can help and what solutions we might be able to offer in our lane. I'll defer to Dave in terms of, some of these deadlines that are coming up, et cetera, but specifically on these items that are coming up next, we're here to support, what's needed in order to provide some solutions to these scenarios. But again, I think our primary responsibility for my lane is to make sure that we're protecting the tax system, that we're fulfilling our constitutional duties and responsibilities, while at the same time being sensitive to what the needs are for the taxpayers under this COVID-19. Dave, if I could lean to you to weigh in on additional comments.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Fleming. This is David Young, Deputy Director of the Property Tax Department. If everybody can hear me okay. I wholeheartedly second Ms. Fleming's comments, but I will follow up a little bit on options 1 and 2, and at the risk of reiterating what Chairman Vasquez has already said, we did issue an LTA. It is LTA 2020/024 that announced the governor's executive order and his. Technically, it is a extension to before the county assessors are required to actually assess a penalty on filings for business property statements. That's sort of 571 series. That has been extended till and including May 31st of this month. So folks that need to file these business property statements have until the end of this month to go ahead and file them before penalties are assessed are placed on a roll by the assessors. So that went on LTA 2020/024, and prior to that, on option 2, issue an LTA. We did issue, actually, it's called the CAO, and it's the assessors only, county assessors only letter, and that CAO is 2020-09, and that was a general instruction to both assessors and local assessment appeals boards and clerks of the board as to what provisions, and specifically Revenue Taxation Code 155 and Property Tax Rule 1051 that gives the board authority to extend certain deadlines for acts that both the assessors and the Assessment Appeals Board, clerks of the board are required to do. So that actually went out, I believe, in April. And then finally, to follow up on Ms. Fleming's what deadlines we're looking forward in the future. Another one that we have been getting some inquiries from taxpayers on is Proposition 60 and 90, and that is a provision in the Revenue Taxation Code that allows somebody of 55 years or older to transfer their base year value from one home to a replacement home. You have to meet certain qualifications, but if you do, then you're allowed to take your Prop 13 base from your old home and apply it to your new one. There is a 2-year statute. There's a 2-year limit in which you're allowed to do that, to purchase your replacement home. And for some folks, we've been hearing that it's been trying to locate and purchase a replacement home, and a lot of that has to do with slow down the construction on the replacement homes. So we won't be taking a look at that. I think that kind of covers my comments on the first subcategory here. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Malia Cohen. May I ask a follow-up question to Mr. Young?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. Mr. Young, do you think that are there any outstanding or possibly any unresolved issues related to the governor's executive order?
To the governor's executive order, the N 6120, is that the one you're referring to, Member Cohen?
Hello?
Hi, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I'm here. Okay. Yes, Mr. Young. Yes, that's the one.
It seems. I think it hits the point fairly well for the extension for the business property statements. I don't foresee any. Do you have anything?
No,
concern?
This is Malia. No, I don't. It's not a trick question. It's actually just really straightforward. I'm just leaning on your expertise. I'm just asking if there's any unresolved issues. If you see none, then that's perfectly acceptable.
I think his focus was fairly narrow, and it dealt with the filing of business property statement. I think it's covered well. From the application part of it, I think our LTA to the assessors was fairly clear, and I have not heard any issues back from the assessor community just yet on the application of the executive order. So I don't see any, and I have not yet heard of any. Perhaps that may change with the development later as the day goes on.
That's true. What about as it relates to penalties?
The penalty, what it does is the executive order moved the application of penalty right prior to the executive order. The statute required the application of penalty from May 7th. If a property statement is not filed on May 7th. Actually, you have all of May 7th to file it. After that, there is a penalty applied as a 10% penalty. The executive order moved the application to the end of the month, to March 31st. And as Chair Vasquez already said, that falls on a weekend and it's actually moved to the following Monday. So if I'm not mistaken, that's June 1st or 2nd. It's the following Monday.
June 1st.
June 1st. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
And this is Henry Nanjo, Chief Counsel, to respond to Member Cohen's question. From a legal standpoint, we addressed this a little bit last month. One of the things we in the legal office are sensitive to is the fact that, yes, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic emergency. This has caused an unprecedented situation for the state of California, but at the same time, we need to be mindful of the fact that if we take an action that potentially goes beyond our authority, if that is later challenged and results in an overturn, we end up creating more confusion and chaos than we are solving. So we're trying to maintain that delicate balance, as we mentioned at the last meeting. And at the last meeting, we kind of described our concerns over the statute and the code scheme that essentially makes it clear that the board has authority to extend deadlines for assessors, but there was some question as to whether that authority extended to deadlines of taxpayers. I believe at the April meeting we indicated that our preference would be a governor's executive order because that would he clearly has the authority to do that. So we are very satisfied with the way that the executive order was written, and it's consistent with the relief that this board was looking at making sure we could achieve for taxpayers.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Nanjo.
Absolutely.
Are we good, Ms. Cohen?
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, wait.
Wait. Go ahead.
Sorry, I have actually a few more thoughts. So we heard from our staff. I was wondering if there is anyone on the call that had an opinion or advice that were our stakeholders or.
Yeah, I believe there's a few on the line, Ms. Cohen. I was going to ask the same thing if there was anybody, because several people have signed up to speak, but it's not real clear on if it's work group 1, 2, or 5.
Mr. Chairman?
Let me have the clerk. I'm sure Ms. Davis has somebody for us.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. We have two that have asked to speak specifically to work group 2 to this topic. Don Gakel, President of the California Assessors Association, and also Chuck Leinhart.
Sure,
Ms. Davis, I think we're still on Work Group 1. Is that correct, Chairman Vasquez, or have we moved to Work Group 2?
No, this is Group 1. So, I think Ms. Davis said there's a couple that want to speak on Group 1, no?
I'm sorry. I mistakenly thought we were on Group 2. They would like to speak on Group 2. Thank you for the clarification.
Is there anybody there that wants to speak on Group 1 that you know of, Ms. Davis?
I have not received any specific comment for Work Group 1, but there are several comments, so I'm not sure if there is anyone on the call who wanted to speak to Work Group 1. Just one moment. Let me verify that with those who have submitted.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, as Ms. Davis goes to verify with the other group, I'd like to just say I have a couple questions,
Sure,
or a question that I'd like to get on the record. So, the governor's executive order regarding the filing of business property tax statements. This is specifically Form 571L. It quite simply just extended the filing deadline without penalty from May 7th through May 31st. We've already established that. But it doesn't clearly address the issue of whether assessors may have the discretion to relieve penalties on their own initiative for taxpayers who can provide evidence that they've been prevented from delivering or transmitting business property statements after the revised May 31st deadline. Taxpayers who are in this unfortunate situation would have to submit claims or relief of penalty to the Assessment Appeals Board and go through, quite frankly, a potentially long and what I would imagine a pretty cumbersome process. And frankly, I don't know how many taxpayers would fall into this category. And I'm not sure if anyone else on this call knows the answer. But I think what we should be doing is we should seek to provide assessors with the authority to act so that they can relieve the late filing penalties for taxpayers who, through no fault of their own, are prevented from meeting the May 31st filing deadline, which is quickly approaching. So here's what I propose. I'd like to suggest that a survey of assessors be conducted simply to ascertain if such a need exists, and if it is determined that the need exists, that we send a letter to the governor granting assessors the authority to relieve penalties for taxpayers who can provide evidence that they couldn't meet the May 31st deadline. So that's my action item, that's my request as it relates to Work Group 1, or Work Group Team 1.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. It sounds like the President, Don Gako, wants to comment on this now, item 1. So let me call him up and see, and we can ask him specifically in terms of the association.
Great.
Is Don available?
And Mr. Chairman, while we're waiting for Mr. Gako, please note that Assessor Larry Stone would also like to speak after Don Gako.
Whenever you're ready, Don.
Mr. Gakel, if you're on the participant line, press *0. We can identify your line and open it up.
Are we waiting to hear from Mr. Gakel?
Yes, and if he doesn't get on, I'm thinking maybe we'll just go to Larry Stone and then have Don come on after.
Perhaps we should do that. Sounds like he's having some.
Yeah, I think he's having trouble with technical. Ms. Davis, why don't we go ahead and let Larry Stone start? I know he wanted to go after, but.
Okay, and we also have one more comment from Chuck Leinhardt as well.
All right, why don't we just line those two up and then see if Don by then figures out the technical difficulties.
Thank you. I believe AT&T is working on that.
Thank you. So who do we have first then?
Okay, we have Don Geckel open now for you.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Don.
Mr. Geckel, your line's open, sir.
Don, are you on mute? Hello, hello.
One moment.
Hello.
We've got him now. I'm sorry, Mr.
Okay.
Geckel, you're open. Go ahead, sir.
Go ahead, Don.
Sorry for the technology glitch. I just wanted to say that on this topic that the California Assessors Association was happy to engage on this issue. I had reached out to BOE staff around the 16th of March on this issue, asking what options were available at the board. And I think based on legal response to that request, I know you, Chair Vasquez, sent a letter to the governor on this topic, and subsequently the California Assessors Association sent a letter as well. And we are pleased that the governor's executive order extended the deadline and provided relief for taxpayers. But I did want to address Member Cohen's specific question. The assessors had asked for authority to waive penalties for the period from May 7th through May 31st, which is the deadline to file amended statements. We did not ask for that authority beyond that, and ultimately in the governor's executive order, he did not grant assessors that discretionary authority to waive penalties, but extended the deadline to May 31st. And I think all assessors are working with that new deadline, and I have not heard any issues. Thankfully, in my county, we are within a percentage point or two of our normal statements received by this date. So hopefully that is working for other counties too, and the taxpayers will be able to get that benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next? Who do we have next, Ms. Davis?
We have Assessor Larry Stone.
Larry, go ahead.
Larry, if you can press *0, please. Mr. Stone, if you can press *0 on your phone's keypad, we'll identify your line and open you up.
If Mr. Stone is not available, we have Chuck Leinhardt who'd like to make a comment.
Chuck Leinhardt, *0, please. I think we have Mr. Leinhardt. One moment.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Mr. Leinhardt, go ahead. You're open.
Thank you. Honorable Chair Vasquez, honorable board members, thank you for this opportunity to...
Looks like he just dropped.
He dropped, yeah.
issue, which is something I've heard from a number of assessors about. I would like to at least suggest that you put in the parking lot for consideration potentially drafting a letter to the governor asking for an executive order that would provide some extension of time frame for people that have been caught in these transfers due to the COVID-19 event. I don't know exactly what that time frame should look like, but I think it's a discussion that should be had in the near future. And as we go through other items today, I have suggested other executive orders that may benefit the system. So I'd just like to go on record to have you make some notes and consider potentially including this in a request to the governor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did we find Larry Stone?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Just one comment. The assessors are satisfied with the governor's executive order. We can work within those limits, and we seem to be doing quite well in terms of the number of filings we get. I would like to comment on a related issue and to say that the BOE, in our opinion, does not have the unilateral authority to extend deadlines to assessors. That's clear. If an executive order was required from the governor to extend the deadline from May 7th, then why wouldn't an executive order from the governor be necessary to extend any other deadlines? Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Mr. Chairman, we have one more comment from Marcy Berkman, Counsel for the Assessments Appeals Board of Santa Clara County.
Sure, go ahead.
Sir, if you're on the participant line, press *0 so we can identify.
Marcy Berkman.
Marcy Berkman, *0, please. And we're seeing no response from any of the participant lines at this time.
The last comment we've received so far.
Marcy, press 10, see if we can get you to pop up in the Q&A screen. Press 10, Marcy, please.
I think we're safe to go on to the next one, Mr. Chairman. It looks like this was an online submission.
All righty, thank you.
Chairman Vasquez, if I can address one of Member Cohen's questions about extension of penalties, waiving of penalties by the Assessment Appeals Board. It is there; they do have the authority to do that on their own. So I just wanted that. I think she had a query to that effect. I just wanted to clarify that the Assessment Appeals Board do have currently the authority to waive penalties. Thank you.
Hearing no other comments or questions, then let's move on to Group 2.
Well, before we move on, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank you and thank the folks that weighed in. I appreciate the discussion. I actually found it really helpful with helping me to make my decision today. So just as a point of order, Mr. Chair, how is the vote going to be structured? Are we just going to take up at the end all of the items, or are we going to go item 1, take a position on the recommendation, item 2? I'm asking for a point of clarification.
Yes. What I was envisioning is that we can go through each item, basically working group, and at the end of it, if there's something that you want to move, let us know and make a motion. If not, we'll go on to the next group. So, for example, on this one, I know you were suggesting that possibly we may do a survey on this. One of the things I was thinking, we may want, we still have a little bit of time because we are coming back together on May 28th before the end of the month. So if we're hearing from assessors or if you're hearing from folks, we do have that opportunity at that point to take some action or make a motion as well.
Okay, that sounds good. So I just
well?
also want to clarify. I just was clarifying that was a suggested preference. I wasn't making a motion for an action. It was just I'm just trying to ascertain if there's a consensus amongst the assessors. Having heard from the Assessors Association, kind of clarifies my questions, and it sounds like there may not be a need for a survey. And again, we can again take this up in the next board meeting as well. So I appreciate you allowing me an opportunity to get that feedback. Thank you.
Not a problem. With that, let's go ahead and go into work group number 2, which is relief from assessment appeals deadlines. And I'll open it up to the members first. Is there anybody that had a chance to take a deep dive into this one? The comments from the stakeholders, or have any questions or comments, or would like to take a lead on this?
I could say something.
Yes, go ahead.
Before we begin the discussion on this one, just again would like to hear from our staff and legal counsel, as well as our stakeholders. If there's anyone on the call that'd like to comment on this item or express their views,
I know there's a couple of stakeholders on the line. Let's start with staff, and then we'll go on to those from the stakeholders group.
Great.
We'll start with Brenda.
Good morning. Thank you for your question. As it relates to things that we've done to date regarding the AABs, under RTC 155, we currently have the ability to grant extensions for the deadline extensions for both, as you know, for the assessors and for the AABs. We've actually received to date, I believe, 2 requests for extensions for the AABs. I believe one was for a 30-day, one was for a 40-day, and we are prepared to exercise within our authority to exercise that extension and grant them that extension. To the extent that others are requesting that, we're prepared to respond accordingly. And again, there's been guidance provided as to what they're available to do. I think the issue, and we should open this up for the discussion, I think the issue is whether or not that one-time extension is adequate. It's my understanding, as I'm hearing from that audience, is that maybe something that's ongoing. There's a question then as a result of whether or not it's just a one-time extension or if it's something that can be done repeatedly. We really would need to drill down on that more to get clarity legally as to if we have that authority. Staff, and I think Mr. Nanjo's on the call with us, staff at this point's interpretation legally is that it's a one-time opportunity. And so to the extent that we feel like there's a need amongst the AAB community, that would be something that my recommendation would be we have discussions with the governor's office about flexibility with that authority. Mr. Nanjo, if you have any other comments on that.
Thank you, Ms. Fleming. Henry Nanjo, Chief Counsel. We did talk about this at the April 21st meeting. Our reading and research on this topic is that the board has the authority to make a one-time extension. Our concern is, as I mentioned in a previous response, that the risk of litigation and causing more chaos and confusion to interpret a multiple extension ability or authority on the part of the board is not supported by the language of the statute and any of the research that we have done. So thank you very much.
I'm assuming there's no other staff person, Ms. Fleming?
Yes, this is David Young, Deputy Director of Property Tax Department. I concur with Ms. Fleming's and Mr. Nanjo's comments. She is correct. We did receive 2, and we are in the process of reviewing and processing those two requests from the AABs, and it will. Yes, one is a 40 days and one is a 30 days request for extension. The only other comment I may have is on option 2. I understand the request, but I just don't see a statutory provision to restrict a waiver to a time certain. It is under. We actually have a property tax rule that deals with waivers of time, and the waiver of time, as it is now, starts once the waiver is granted. It's open-ended, and the appellant is able to cancel the waiver, terminate the waiver with a 120-day notice, and that is. And that's on 2, so I may be jumping ahead a little bit. That's my comment for number 2. So then that's all I have for subgroup 2. Thank you.
Thank you. With
Mr.
that,
Chair, Member Cohen, I'd like to, I guess, speak and just acknowledge that I would be interested in hearing if there's any other persons on the call who'd like to comment on this item. Again, this just helps me inform a lot of my thoughts and thinking around item 2.
Yes, I believe there's a couple stakeholders on the line that Ms. Davis identified. So why don't we go ahead and let them speak?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have Don Gakel, President of the California Assessors Association, and also Chuck Leinhardt, that have both identified they wanted to speak on this matter specifically.
Let's go ahead and turn it over to, I guess, Don Gakel first. Is Don around?
Yeah, we had Don's line open. Let's see if he dropped off. Perhaps he got disconnected inadvertently. Okay, he has dropped, unfortunately.
The next speaker is Chuck Leinhardt.
Chuck, make sure you hit *0 so you unmute yourself. All speakers, for that matter.
This is Chuck. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chair Vasquez, honorable board members. I have a couple of comments on this item. The first is I think the board may want to consider a multi-pronged approach. Obviously, you have the authority to act under option 1. In talking in the working group and chatting with the clerks of the board, the suggestion was tendered that what they really needed to get back on track was to have a waiver for the period of the executive order plus 120 days for them to get back organized and ready to move forward. And so I would like to suggest that you move forward with option 1 and that you, again, put in the parking lot, as we spoke about the prior item, putting together a request for an executive order that would provide for a waiver of the 2-year statute for the period of the EO plus 120 days. The other suggestion that I would make, which I made in my response, didn't make the cut, was that the clerks currently have an assembly bill out there. It's Assembly Bill 3373, which would allow counties to expand the number of assessment appeals boards that they have. And I can tell you that my experience over the last 3 years working with CADA and large counties has made me appreciate the challenges that they have and the workloads that they have with their assessment appeals boards, very different from what I have here in Plumas County. But it seems to me that the board looking at that bill and perhaps willing to support the bill might help create more assessment appeals boards and create more efficiency. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Did Don get back on the line by any chance?
Checking. I don't believe so, but we'll check real quick.
This is Vice Chair Dschafer. I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, Vice Chair.
Yes, I'd like to ask our BOE staff how many counties have asked for an extension of their roll due date of July 1st? If we know.
This is Deputy Director David Young. I believe it's either 23 or 24. I think it was 23 as of earlier this week. So we may have gotten another one. Okay, thank you.
Well, that's a majority. Do we need more? Yeah, thank you. They're only asking for it if they need it. Thank you for the information.
Okay.
Member Vasquez?
Yes.
This is Ted Gaines.
Yes, go ahead, Member Gaines.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really enjoying the discussion here, and I appreciate the comments that Assessor Leinhardt has made regarding option 1, and with that 40-day extension coupled with AB 3373, and I think it would make sense for the board to take a look at that legislation and see if we can support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Davis, did we find Don, or did he get disconnected?
I believe he was disconnected, and there were no other commenters specifically for this item.
Okay, so now it's back before us, members. I think, Member Cohen, did you have any other questions about this before we move on?
Yes, thank you. This is Member Cohen. I appreciate that. So I think upon review and consideration of this information, advice, and counsel concerning the item, I suggest that possibly we revisit these items at our next board meeting before taking any formal action today.
Okay, so we can put that in our midterm goal thing, you're thinking?
Sure, if that is how you have the meetings, these goals kind of structured. But I just wanted to finish up and say that I respectfully suggest that the next board meeting lists each of the items individually so that the public can have an opportunity to participate fully in these important public policy matters.
We can do
the
that.
early days, but okay, good, because I think it just makes it easier for us to navigate the discussion, and I just wanted to voice some of my concerns that from the early days of this pandemic that we provide options for the assessors and the clerks of the Assessment Appeals Board to postpone official acts. And that's largely because these essential boards determine the value of property that fund our schools and our local county and city governments, which also includes our first responders. And so I just wanted to clearly state that we're also committed to ensuring that the taxpayers' appeal rights are preserved and that we defend them. And however, I do believe that it would be wrong to allow incorrect valuations, which often significantly lower valuations, be enrolled simply because deadlines haven't been met for the rendering of the final decision. So I think research, more information will be very helpful to inform us before we take action on the next meeting. Or action on the item.
Let me ask if there's other members on the call that are on board or have any other suggestions or comments, if we were to just make sure that we roll or table this until, or bring it back, I guess, for further discussion on the May 28th meeting. Do we have an opinion either way from any of the other members?
Well, could I move that we bring this back for discussion at the May 29th meeting? This is Member Vice Chair Dschafer.
Sure, but it's May 28th, just for...
May 28th is fine, yes. Thank you.
I'll second that.
And that's been seconded by
Member Gaines.
I'm not sure if a motion is needed, but since there's one on the table, maybe the Chief Counsel could opine on that. I don't think there's a motion necessary.
The Chief Counsel Henry Nanjo, Member Cohen is correct. A motion is not necessary. You can just provide that direction to staff because I believe there is a consensus of a majority of the board members. If you'd like to take a motion to formalize it, that can be done as well.
What is the preference of the board?
Yeah, this is Member Gaines. I think we should formalize it with a vote. Thank you.
Not a problem. If there's no other discussion, can we get Ms. Davis just to call a roll? And actually clarify the motion. The way I understood it is that we were just taking, the motion was made to carry this over and to bring it back to fully vet it again on May 28th and to see if there's any action the board chooses to take.
This is Henry Nanjo. That's my understanding of the motion, is to bring the subject of the work group to topic and put it on the agenda for the May 28th meeting under the M item.
This is Yvette Stowers speaking.
Yes. Go ahead, Ms. Stowers.
I appreciate having it coming back and fully vetted. I just want to make sure that will include input from the clerk and, most importantly, their May 12th letter and their request for our support for an executive order.
So is that a friendly amendment?
No,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's a friendly amendment.
Is that friendly to the maker, Mr. Gaines?
This is Vice Chair Dschafer. I understand the head of the clerks is speaking today on this topic.
Then perhaps we should hear from them before we carry it over to the next meeting.
Well, you know, Mrs. Stowers, we did ask if there was anybody else, and they may not be on the call because we didn't hear from anybody else other than the two speakers that did come forward.
This is Marcy Berkman. I'd like to speak. Am I on a live line?
Yes.
Marcy.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I think we've all been having technical difficulties. I believe we're all on the line, but when we press *0 or 10, we can't be heard. On the sub of the extension of the 2-year statute, the Clerks and Assessment Appeal Council strongly urge the board to go to the governor and join us in requesting an executive order extending and tolling the 2-year statute 1604 for the duration of the emergency plus 120 days. That's vital so that our boards can perform their constitutional duty. If I may briefly go back, they had been trying to loop me in on the 571L question, and I kept trying to speak, but technologically couldn't be heard. Revenue and Taxation Code Section 155, in answer to the board's question there, and also several agenda items later. RTC 155 provides the board authority to grant up to 40 days extension of time to applicants and to assessors, but it does not provide the board authority to extend time for acts by applicants, such as filing 571Ls or filing deadlines on the supplemental and escapes. And as a matter of a canon of construction of appellate law, the courts prohibit reading words of the statutes that aren't there. So where that statute says assessor and AAB, the board can't read applicant into that. And so that applies to several of the subjects where options were proposed to extend time for an applicant to do something. The board does not have authority for that. That would need to come from the governor. Thank you.
And just as a clarification, members, Ms. Berkman is also aligned with legal department's opinion. She used the term applicant we've identified that as taxpayer deadlines as opposed to assessor or AAB deadlines. So it's the same comment that I made earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I understand Mr. Don Gako might be on the line now.
Yes, I am.
Go ahead, Don.
Okay, on this topic, although the CAA has not taken a formal position on this, certainly there is no opposition from the CAA to what the CAA CEO is requesting on this, and certainly to resolve issues of tolling dates, I, as the assessor of Stanislaus County, would support that, and I imagine that most assessors would. So we have no opposition to what the CAA CEO is attempting to do here.
Thank you. Ms. Stowers, are you comfortable moving forward, or are you still are requesting the amendment to go attached to the motion?
Well, since we did hear from someone regarding their request for the executive order and it's on the record, I am comfortable with moving forward because I'm sure that when we go to our full vetting, we will consider all parties' perspectives.
You will.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Ms. Davis. We do have one more speaker who'd like to make a comment, John McKibben, the committee chair of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials. Mr. McKibben,
sure.
Are you on the line?
John McKibben, are you there?
Hello?
Yes. Is this John?
This is Thomas Parker, LA County Counsel for the AAB. I've been trying to offer some comments on the work group 2 that we've been discussing. For whatever technological reason, it's not as smooth as it could be.
Go ahead. Apologies for that, Tom.
Thank you. First of all, I fully concur with what Ms. Berkman, my Santa Clara colleague, said. Further, I agree with the State Board staff position that there is no authority currently for any time-limited time period time waivers. That's quite a mouthful, but what I'm trying to say is time waivers are indefinite under the law unless and until the taxpayer unilaterally, by written notice, chooses to terminate the property tax time waiver. I concur with State Board staff on that point. And I think I concur with Ms. Berkman in her clarification of what the CAA CEO wants, which is an extension in tolling for the period of the crisis back to, I believe, March 4th of 2020, and then 120 days thereafter. Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else, or are we good?
This is John McKibben, Mr. Chairman. I apologize.
Oh, go ahead, John.
I apologize. I wasn't able to come in. I heard most of what was said just now, but missed some of it and was unable to connect with the meeting until now for purposes of testimony. Yeah, Tom and Tom Parker and Marcy Berkman did accurately speak for the clerks of the board with regard to the remedy that we're looking for, and that is an extending and tolling of the 2-year statute as we submitted in writing, plus 120 days, during the time of the emergency, plus 120 days. And we take the 120 days out of Property Tax Rule 323 in your own board's rules. It will give us sufficient time to gear up, reopen, make sure we're in compliance with any social distancing orders that may still be in existence, and to put everybody back on track to get their hearing. As I've testified to before, our sole aim, we are the neutrals in this process, and our sole aim is to make sure that the appeal system runs as smoothly and efficiently as possible. We are terribly concerned about any notion of any kind of time-limited waiver, because that will just make it very complicated. It would establish what I've come to term as a jungle of different time-limited waiver periods that we have to try to somehow keep track of and currently are not able to. I wanted to emphasize, too, that the waiver is something that the taxpayer, the appellant, in an assessment appeal, signs voluntarily. And the taxpayer can rescind that waiver at any time, but in keeping with your Rule 323, we need a 120-day notice from the taxpayer of that cancellation. So it's consistent. What we're proposing is merely consistent with existing law, but taking into account the fact that we're going to be shut down for quite a few months before we can resume processing. And I apologize again for my lateness in coming in on this issue.
No problem. Thank you. Thanks for your comments.
Mr. Chairman, we have a few others that we're not able to get through that wanted to make a comment. We have
on this issue on work group 2?
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Chris O'Neill, Chair of the California Alliance of Taxpayers Advocates.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Chris O'Neill. I am the chairman of the California Alliance of Taxpayer Advocates, and I just want to say I think that we understand the issue that the assessment appeals boards face with the 2-year statute as taxpayers, and certainly it's an issue that needs to be addressed. Our only concern, and we put this in the proposals that we've sent into the board as part of the Team 2 task force, is that when the boards are again up and running, that those taxpayers who were scheduled for hearing, those taxpayers who are at or near the 2-year limit, that they're not put to the back of the line, that they don't have to start over again and wait another 2 years or whatever the period of time would be. I think Mr. McKibben has indicated that to the extent the clerks are able to do that, they will maintain everybody's place in line. But I think what we were recommending as CADA would be that the SBE would issue an LTA that would kind of just set forth here are the ground rules. This is how we expect the boards to get back on track after the period of time of extension that's granted by the governor, whether it's the period of COVID plus 120 days or however long that period of time is. So as CADA, California Alliance of Taxpayer Advocates, just wanted to make sure that we put this on the record and that the other board members, Ms. Cohen, Mr. Gaines, and Ms. Stowers were aware of CADA's position. We are sympathetic to the issues that the CA CEO and Mr. McKibben's group are facing. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Davis, it sounds like there was somebody else.
Yes, if you could just bear with me just for a moment. We've gotten a number of emails from commenters who wanted to, or public officials who wanted to make comments, but we've been having technical difficulties that we've just been made aware of. So if you could just bear with me for just one moment while I comb through the list and I can get the next speaker. Just one moment, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we may have captured all of the speakers for work group 2. If I'm mistaken, I believe you have the option of pressing *0 if you'd like to make a comment if I have not recognized you. Is there anyone else on the call?
This is Paul Waldman. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Hi. Thank you all. I'm president of CADA, and Chris talked a little bit about some of the things I was going to mention, so I'll just talk about some of the other issues. With regard to the 2-year statute, I don't recall if Chris mentioned this, but one of our concerns is that the hearings that were postponed sort of end up at the back of the line and end up waiting a couple of years for a hearing. So we just want to make sure that they maintain sort of their order in scheduling and are not kind of put back at the end and are prioritized. So that was one issue that we had. We also wanted to make sure that any communication regarding this is proactive and doesn't require applicants to sort of call into the board or go to a website to get the information. So that was a couple of our issues. We talked about the waivers, and that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. The other issues I was going to talk about had to do with the 1605, 60-day supplemental and deadline. I don't know if we're talking about that yet. It's part of this group, but it hasn't been brought up yet.
Not yet.
Okay. So that was it on the statute. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Marcy Brookman. I have a question.
As it relates to the work group 2?
Yes, and in addressing things, I've been limiting my comments to the topics as they come up within the work group one by one. One question I have is related to CADA's inquiry. Assessment appeals boards, we give written notice of when the hearing is. We give written notice of any postponements of hearings. We give written notice of any time an application needs to be edited, written notice of the board's decisions, and also respond both telephonically and in writing. And when I say we, I mean the clerks. Anytime an applicant or an agent has an inquiry. And one of my questions is I don't understand what CADA is referring to when they're talking about the state board asking the assessment appeals boards to proactively let applicants know what's going on rather than applicants, for example, phoning in. Given everything we already do to keep the applicants and their agents apprised of what's going on, I don't know if they're suggesting that once a week or once a month or once a quarter, they call every one of the tens of thousands of taxpayers who are currently waiting for an assessment appeal to be heard to let them know how many months it looks like till the hearing might be called, or what, if anything, they're asking the assessment appeals boards and their clerks to do in terms of notice beyond what I've already described to you. But if there are things that they're asking for in addition to that, one of my questions would be, is the State Board of Equalization or the State of California going to provide funding for the additional full-time positions that would be required to do that?
This is Paul Waldman. Can I respond?
I'm sorry, who's this?
This is Paul Waldman with CADA.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify, that's not what we're not saying you'd have to communicate on a regular basis. We just want to make sure that if there is some type of action taken here, that it doesn't end up in a situation where it's not a general notice. We want to make sure that the normal notice that you guys normally do would apply to whatever's happening here. So we're not asking for anything above and beyond that.
Thank you. Ms. Davis, is that it?
That's all that I see, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Members, let's get back to our motion. We do have a motion on the floor that's been seconded.
Mr. Chair, this is Maria Cohen. I do have a suggestion and an amendment possible for consideration. So, Mr. Chair, question for you. Do you have the suggested executive order language from the AAB? If so, I recommend a friendly amendment to this item of the work group that it be placed on the agenda, specifically including the AAB's recommended executive order language. And again, this relates to Mr. Dschafer's pending amendment. So if you have the language, fantastic. I'm sure you can we can add it in our board agenda packet for those that need to refer to it. But I'd like to just amend, friendly amendment, and add that we include the Assessment Appeals Board's proposed language to the executive order for consideration.
For the May 28th meeting, you're suggesting, I'm assuming.
That is correct.
Is that friendly to the makers of the motion, Mr. Gaines and Vice Chair Dschafer?
That's fine.
Mr. Gaines?
Yeah, this is Member Gaines is fine. Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And Vice Member Dschafer, I'm fine.
Are we set to vote then, folks?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is John McKibben. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure there were two versions, slightly different one from the other, between the actual language of the order, the executive order that we were looking for. I'd urge you to not use the one that was in our briefing paper because it was missing two important words that are consistent with your board's rules at the moment, Rule 323, and use the later one that we submitted in a letter last week.
Well noted.
Mr. McKibben, may I ask that you just submit the final language to the entire board as well as to the executive staff so that we have it?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Will do.
Ms. Davis, can you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Chairman Vasquez?
Yes.
Vice Chairman Dschafer?
Yes.
Member Gaines?
Yes.
Member Cohen?
Aye.
Ms. Stowers?
Yes.
So that's unanimous, folks. Before we move on to Work Group 3, let me just do a quick check with staff. How are we doing? Do we need to take a 5-minute break, or do you want to keep going?
A break would be appreciated, Chairman Vasquez. Thank you for asking.
Is 5 minutes sufficient?
10 minutes would be better. I just want to check into some logistical issues.
All right, let's do 10. Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about AT&T.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a 10-minute break, and we'll reconvene in 10 minutes, which right now it's 11:55, so that'd be 12:05.
Let's be prompt. Member Dschafer.
Thank you.